Now, the finance minister is faced with tough choices, as we've been explaining all morning, as he seeks to balance scarce resources against rising spending priorities in his second attempt to deliver that budget in Parliament later today. Let's discuss this now with Lisette Ijssel de Schepper, who's the chief economist at the Bureau for Economic Research and joins us now via our video link. Lisette, it's lovely to see you. Thanks for your time and your patience, and welcome to the SABC News channel. You know, in a world where the finance minister can't make everyone happy, the question we've been trying to answer is what he should prioritize. And I wonder whether you have a view on that.
Yeah, I'm very glad not to have his job. Let's put it like that. The fiscal stance, in a way, changed with the budget that we saw in 19 February. There was a clear shift towards more expenditure, and for more expenditure, you need more revenue, and that's why they ended up with a 2% VAT hike, because they had to find the money somewhere. The big question is whether all this expenditure is really necessary. There was expenditure going to frontline workers. It's difficult to argue that we don't need nurses, that we don't need teachers. There was money going to above inflation social grants, which is also difficult to argue that we don't need. But at the end of the day, we need to keep in mind that we're sort of at an end point in terms of the revenue that we can still squeeze out of the economy, and then tough decisions need to be made.
Yeah, and it seems none of these decisions actually leave ordinary South Africans spared. I mean, even if, for example, we don't see an increase in tax, that means we have to see a decrease in spending, which affects ordinary South Africans. If you do increase tax, of course, it means there's less spending for anything else, which affects ordinary South Africans. The question I'm trying to get at, Lisette, is whether or not ordinary South Africans are going to get out of this unscathed, no matter how the finance minister ultimately decides.
Probably not. Probably one way or another we'll end up paying more taxes, whether that is through a VAT hike, whether that is through higher sin taxes, whether that is through a reversal of the fuel levy relief. At the end of the day, we're very likely to end up paying more. Now, if we get more for that, if we see the social delivery coming through, if we see the services delivery coming through, then we would be happy to pay more. The question, of course, is, and you had earlier discussions around this, is whether that will happen, whether we will get what we pay for at the end of the day.
What we also need to keep in mind, of course, is the responsibility to communicate to international markets a message that, in fact, there is some kind of sustainable way forward, especially when you consider South Africa's ratings, a bigger pardon, as things stand. If we don't get the money from here at home, there's questions about getting it from borrowing. But again, I don't know how well that would bode for what I've just mentioned.
Yeah, so the government seems really committed to fiscal consolidation, which I think is important. So you can do that through either expenditure cuts or tax increases or borrowing. And it really seems as if the government is trying to avoid to borrow more. Of course, we're already borrowing quite a bit. Our debt to GDP ratio continues to increase. And at some point, you would like to see that leveling off, and you would like to see that coming down. We want to spend money on nurses and teachers, not on repaying our debt. In the February budget, the decision was made to do fiscal consolidation through tax increases rather than expenditure cuts. We might see a bit more of a balance this time around. At the end of the day, the financial markets, the rating agencies want to see a budget. They want to be able to scrutinize it, see how it's going to impact government financing going forward, hope that it's a credible forecast with sensible assumptions. But I mean, there's no reason to doubt that they will be able to deliver that. Let's hope that they were able to do that so quickly.
Absolutely. During his State of the Nation address, the president made mention of billions of rand for infrastructure financing, about 100 billion rand, in fact. That obviously is also difficult to argue against. Just to grow the list of things that you mentioned are tough to push back against. But I do wonder whether there's any way around improving infrastructure that is currently in place as opposed to starting new projects. And, I'm asking you this question, not even sure how much of a difference really it would make, given that 60-odd billion rand that we need.
The infrastructure spend figure that Cyril Ramaphosa likes to quote, unfortunately, does not change much on a year-on-year basis. We tend to see the same figure being quoted, and there's not necessarily additional spending added. That said, the February budget would have added some additional spending to infrastructure. If you think about government spending, there's a concept called fiscal multipliers. So essentially it tells you if you spend 1 rand on something, what will it do to the economy going forward? Good infrastructure spending has a very high multiplier. So if you spend 1 rand now, it can actually have a much more positive and a much bigger positive impact over time. So we would never argue against productive infrastructure spending. If we can look at the bottlenecks in the local economy, electricity, we had a brief return of load shedding, sort of reminding us that the system remains fragile. The ports, logistics, there's plenty of need for significant infrastructure spending. So hopefully that spending continues as planned. Hopefully over the years we're able to add to that, because we do know that will have positive implications for the economy and for economic growth, which is what we need at the end of the day to get us out of this predicament.
Absolutely. If only we could do that rather quicker than later, I think that would answer a lot of our issues. Lisette, thanks very much indeed for giving us your insights. We appreciate it. And again, we'll have to wait and see how the finance minister ultimately decides. Lisette is the chief economist at the Bureau for Economic Research. Once again,